AskReddit by Throw Away My Life 2341. What are some events in recorded history that are extremely hard to believe, but without a doubt actually happened? Halley's Comet appeared in the sky when Mark Twain was born in 1835. The comet moves in a 75 or 76 year orbit, and, as it neared Earth once again, Twain said, "I came in with Halley's Comet and I expect to go out with it." Sure enough, he died on the 21st of April, 1910, just as the comet made its next pass within sight of Earth. He was an alien who got dropped off for a vacation via the interstellar transit and then was picked up the next time it came around. In 1908, Russia showed up 12 days late to the Olympics because the world switched calendars while they did not. To accommodate the Russian team, some events were rescheduled so that the Russian athletes could participate. This led to longer duration for those Olympics, which lasted from the 27th of April to the 31st of October, making it the longest Olympic Games in history. The Battle of Bull Run, one of the first battles of the US Civil War, occurred on and around Wilmer McLean's farm in Northern Virginia. Not wanting to live surrounded by war, McLean and his family moved to Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. The Battle of Appomattox Courthouse was the last significant battle between Union and Confederate forces. The Confederates signed the surrender order in Wilmer's sitting room. It is said that the Civil War started on Wilmer's farm and ended in his sitting room. He was not happy about it, either, as he stated he had moved specifically to get away from the war as much as he possibly could. In 2014, Pope Francis released doves in the Vatican to symbolize his hopes for peace in the world. As soon as the doves began to fly, a seagull and a crow swooped down and attacked them in front of everyone. https://www.google.com/amp/s/pope-doves-attack-b-y-crow-seagull-st-peters-square. That's fucking ominous. Nicholas Alcemade fell 18,000 feet without a parachute from a burning plane in 1944 and suffered no serious injury. I see how the snow cover helped, but how he didn't get skewered by pine trees or break a single bone is shocking. That time everyone died of a dancing sickness where they danced themselves to death in France. Mass hysteria. Yup. Saint Vitus dance, as it is called, still doesn't have a definitely known cause, if I remember correctly, either. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, please. New research as of 2021 shows pseudonym chorea as the most likely cause. https://www.brainandlife.org/pseudonym-chorea-st-vitus-dance-name. Mongolians executing 100k plus populations in a few HRS. Very efficient head chopping. The Battle of Castellata, https://en.m.wiki.org/battle_of_castle_at in WW2 was fought between the Waffen-SS and a group comprised of American and German soldiers, local resistance fighters, and several French celebrities, including Paul Renault, who had been the Prime Minister of France during WW1. Including a tennis player who lobbed grenades through opened windows with his racket. Yes, for real. John O'Neill, the FBI agent in charge of investigating Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden in the 1990s, grew frustrated with the bureaucratic politics within the FBI and between the FBI and CIA that he felt hampered his mission. He decided to leave the FBI and take a higher paying job in the private sector. In the 23rd of August, 2001, he became the chief of security at the World Trade Center. He was killed in the attacks just a few weeks later. Looks like someone had a grudge to settle. The Nutmeg Wars. The Dutch and the English went to war 3 times over nutmeg, which at the time was only known to grow on one South Pacific island. Or the Cod Wars between England and Iceland. They sure like fighting countries 3 times. Theodore Roosevelt found his boat was stolen. So he built a new boat, tracked the thieves down and arrested them. He then proceeded to walk them multiple days, without sleeping, so they could receive a trial instead of just shooting them on the spot. It was in the middle of a harsh winter, so he didn't handcuff them, for fear they'd get frostbite, so instead he just kept himself awake by reading Tolstoy with a gun trained on them the whole trek. That's only the 22nd most Teddy thing I've ever read, but a new one which makes me love it. In 2019, a convicted murderer on day release bravely fought off a terrorist at London Bridge with a narwhal tusk. https://www.bbc.co.uk/UK-50870309. Edited to add that he was a convicted murderer thanks to our Rainbow Warrior here for reminding me. Edited again to add that the guy with the narwhal tusk was a civil servant and the convict on day release battled the terrorist with a fire extinguisher. This story gets more awesome with every correction. Almost as good as the Scottish bloke who kicked that airport van attacker so hard in the balls he broke his foot while the dude was on fire. Edwin Booth, brother of John Wilkes Booth, saved the life of Robert, the son of President Abraham Lincoln. Top 10 anime redemption arcs be like. Edit, misspelled redemption. The masses marching to the Berlin Wall and tearing it down only happened because earlier that day during a press conference, an East German official, Gunter Schabowski, accidentally incorrectly said leaving East Germany was legal, effective immediately. As far as I know, this becomes effective. It is right away. Immediately is still a famous thing to say in Germany. It would eventually have happened anyway, but it wasn't legal yet. However, people just did it anyways because the guy got visibly confused during the press conference and said the wrong thing. It happens at the very end of this video. https://yahoo.be/jbzhhgcez-e. During Alexander the Great's destruction of the Mediterranean, he was going to leave a small island named Tyre for later, as it would have been hard to besiege it, but the people of Tyre laughed and mocked him, so he literally built a bridge to their island and conquered it. Every time I read something else about him, I'm amazed there haven't been more movie series about him. Christmas Day 1914. The truce on the WW1 battlefields. Shows a humanity inside everyone, but they were able to wake up the next day and go straight back to war, kill the men that they'd spent a sincere day with. I can't remember where I heard the story, I think from the BBC, but I believe from one of the last living Tommies, who said that whilst they were forced to start shooting at each other, the majority of shots intentionally missed, from both sides of no man's land. I believe it was also the same man who said, in reference to Remembrance Day, to also remember the Germans. That stuck with me. They were like our lads, sent out to fight a war for war's sake, forced to do unspeakable things to other men because some higher up told them they had to. Harrison Ajegbarokin, the Nigerian man who survived for 3 days inside an air pocket inside of a sunken ship in the Atlantic. Divers went down to recover bodies and investigate, and they discovered and rescued him. There is footage from the diver rescue. See the link. https://yahoo.be/um1ym9u8xaa. He's actually a diver himself now. The diver who rescued him presented him with his diploma. The time Indiana tried to legislate the value of pi and x200b. Value of pi equals 6 a 699b1 a 260 a. That math professor was unimpressed. In 1903, the New York Times published an article about flying machines. They stated that it would take the combined efforts of all mathematicians and mechanics 1 to 10 million years for powered flight to be achieved. Anyway, about 9 weeks later, the Wright brothers achieved powered flight for the first time. Here is the article: https://wp-content/uploads/2022/04/net-flight.jpg?mark L1456,819 They were also overly cynical afterwards. In 1910 they said that flight would only ever be for billionaires. Of course we had commercial flights by around the 60s achievable for many. People of the time couldn't look at the progress over the previous few centuries and realize we would leapfrog over it in the next few decades. The Ghost Army in WWII. Essentially an American group of troops would deploy army tanks, broadcast fake radio chatter, and deploy loud sound effects over speakers to fool the Nazis into thinking there was a large military presence coming their way. The Ghost Army was used to deceive the Nazis and make them send their military presence elsewhere, which provided openings for the real Allied forces to move in. This was used in the later parts of the war. I never learned about this in school, but I discovered it on my own and thought it was fascinating. Imagine thinking a whole mess of tanks are heading your way, but in reality, it's a couple of inflatable dummies and a few speakers. 1816. The Year Without Summer. https://en.wikipedia.org/year_without_a_summer . I'm a big classic horror fan, so I'm kinda glad this happened. Indirectly lead to Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein. The Great Molasses Flood of 1919 that took place in Boston. A 40-foot wave that killed 21 people. I read a novel about this many years ago and it always stuck with me as one of the craziest, most random tragedies in history. Deleted. Sam O'Nella did a great video on this guy. I still find it totally insane that we were able to put men on the moon with the technology of the time. It blows my mind. Probably the greatest of all human achievement. And it was only 66 years after the first flight of the Wright brothers. The climactic explosion of the 1883 Krakatoa eruption, the loudest sound in recorded history. 50 miles away eardrums ruptured. Sailors 3,000 miles away thought it was a cannon. The pressure wave circled the entire planet more than 3 times. US President Roosevelt issued an executive order that made it illegal for us citizens to keep US gold coins. They made everyone return them or be subject to imprisonment and large fine. The government confiscated over 2,600 metric tons. H2 joules 69 I 57 joules 0 I 512 liters 8.8700 joules 1 joules 7 and amp. Source ED equals Chrome and amp, IE equals UTF-8. I've read that when people find buried gold in the US it's usually from people hiding it during this time. No idea if that's true though. Palm trees, among other flora, were present in Antarctica during the early Eocene epoch, between 55 and 48 million years ago. Only somewhat related, I just read an article about an extinct type of date palm that they found seeds of that are 2,000 years old, and they've recently managed to grow 6 palms, 4 male and 2 female, from them, and thus have brought back an extinct species of palm tea and its fruit. So cool. That animals, if trained enough, can smell out disease. A flock of pigeons was able to correctly spot cancer in breast tissue biopsy images with 99% accuracy, on par with human experts. Why? Distinguishing %20 cancerous %20 from %20 non-cancerous %20 cells. The Kentucky Meat Shower. https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/Kentucky_meat_shower . Bunch of mystery meat fell out of the sky and no one had a clue what it was, but they still ate it as they saw it as a blessing from God. Has anyone posted about the hot air balloon to the Arctic? That's insane to hear about. I can't remember if they made it or just were close, but the balloon crashed and they ended up all dying. Reading about that also made me learn you can die from vitamin A overdose, and eating seal or polar bear liver will give you that. Haha, yeah, and raise Arctic balloon expedition. https://endr.wikipedia.org/c3%a90%2 7s_arctic_balloon_expedition . They were so vastly unprepared, so vastly under-equipped, they were guaranteed to die. They didn't have appropriate clothing, appropriate food, and they couldn't even steer the balloon, which barely mattered, as it crashed down onto the sea ice after just 2 days. They died attempting to trek back south towards civilization. I own a book that contains the contents of their translated diaries and journals, which were found years after their deaths. It is a fascinating read. On the 5th of December, 1664, a man named Hugh Williams was the only survivor of a shipwreck. On the 5th of December, 1785, a man named Hugh Williams was the only survivor of a shipwreck. On the 5th of December, 1820, a man named Hugh Williams was the only survivor of a shipwreck. https://historiedaily.org/the-legend-of-Hugh-Williams. John Tyler was the 10th President of the United States. He was born in 1790 and took office in 1841. His grandson died in 2020. I know he had 2 still alive recently, but one died, so I think there might still be one left. When the pyramids were being built, woolly mammoths still existed. The last use of the guillotine in France was the same year Star Wars was founded. Sir Christopher Lee was in attendance of the last public execution in France. Lenin's body being put on display for 100 years. Literally, he dies in 1924. I'm pretty sure Kim Jong-il's body is currently on display. The Four Pests Campaign. Mao Zedong, in his infinite hubris, thought that there would be no repercussions from an attempt to completely eliminate rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. Plot twist, there were repercussions. Millions of people organized into groups and hit noisy pots and pans to prevent sparrows from resting in their nests, with the goal of causing them to drop dead from exhaustion. Sparrows were replaced with bedbugs, as the extermination of sparrows had upset the ecological balance, which subsequently resulted in surging locust and insect populations that destroyed crops due to lack of a natural predator. The ecological disruption was one of several factors that led to a famine that killed 45 million people. There's 2 things you don't fuck with if you want crops to prosper: birds and pollinators. There would have been a third, and a nuclear world war and possibly the end of the world if Stanislaw Petro didn't react like he did on the 25th of September 1983. In short, he was the only one that questioned the readings on the Russian missile alert system and refused to launch nuclear counter-missiles. Wikipedia article, https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/Stanislav_Petrov. Yup, and another Soviet sub-commander refused to fire missiles after spurious data about incoming missiles. 2 guys prevented WW3, both Soviets. The Rwandan genocide, https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/Rwandan_genocide . My sister just graduated from high school, and she never learned about it. I told her about it and she did some research on it for a paper. Sadly, no one else in her class knew about it either. A summary for those who are too lazy to read the whole wiki page. During the 1994 Rwandan genocide, also known as 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, members of the Hutu ethnic majority in the East Central African nation of Rwanda murdered as many as 800,000 people, mostly of the Tutsi minority. Started by Hutu nationalists in the capital of Kigali, the genocide spread throughout the country with shocking speed and brutality, as ordinary citizens were incited by local officials and the Hutu-powered government to take up arms against their neighbors. By the time the Tutsi-led Rwandese Patriotic Front gained control of the country through a military offensive in early July, hundreds of thousands of Rwandans were dead and 2 million refugees fled Rwanda. During WWII Kaiser shipyards in Vancouver, WA completed 50 Casablanca-class escort aircraft carriers in under 2 years. The Swedish King Gustav II had to wear glasses, badly, but was too vain and refused. In battle, he proceeded to lose his direction and got lost in the smoke, leading him to land behind the enemy's lines. Needless to say, he didn't survive that. So essentially he died because he didn't want to wear his glasses. Wear your glasses, kids. Life is short, and so is your sight. On the 1st of February 1942, following a bombing raid on the Marshall Islands, the Enterprise came under attack by 5 twin-engine Japanese bombers. The lead aircraft, led by Lieutenant Kazuo Nakai, badly damaged by anti-aircraft fire, turned back towards the Enterprise, attempting to ram it. Seeing this, Gedo abandoned his watch post and jumped in a nearby Dauntless parked on the flight deck, and returned fire using the rear-facing .30 caliber machine gun. His fire disabled the aircraft, causing it to narrowly miss the Enterprise, only hitting parked aircraft, including the one Gedo was in, before spiraling into the sea. Upon seeing this act, Vice Admiral William Halsey Spot promoted him to aviation machinist mate first class. And later he survived being shot down, only to be picked up by the Japanese, brutally tortured, and finally thrown overboard whilst attached to an anchor. His ending really sucked, and showed how brutally the Japanese treated their pals. I mean, the obvious answer, but maybe not for some younger editors, is the fact that we landed on the moon. When we did is by far one of, if not the most insanely impressive achievements of human beings, ever. And will likely never really be duplicated. In the span of a handful of years, when the technology was unfathomably infantile, we launched a rocket to outer space with people on board, traveled to the moon, landed on it, walked around, came back inside, launched back up, returned to Earth, plummeted to the surface on fire, and lived. It was a global achievement. It was maybe the most pure human moment that everyone on planet Earth experienced together, as a species. All with the computation of basically a calculator. The moon landing happened 29 years after the first man-made object reached space, 12 years after Sputnik and 8 freaking years after the first manned spaceflight. The speed of advancement is nothing short of insane. There were people who could still recall the first powered flight and were still getting used to the fact that airplane flights were something anyone could do. If I'd been there to see it, I would probably have thought nothing of the idea that we'd have moon tourists and colonies by the 21st century. The USA banned alcohol for about 10 years. The British government bought the entire world's tea crop for 1 year, as in every ounce produced in every country in the world was purchased by them, in the middle of WWII, just because. King George III was against the Stamp Act, and when it was repealed by a politician he supported, a statue of the king was paid for and put up in NY by the people there in thanks, pre-revolution. My grandparents used to have an unused prohibition prescription for whiskey they found in a book at a garage sale. It was years after they bought the book they started reading it that it fell out. They couldn't remember where they bought the book. It was a fracture and dislocation medical book. The Great Molasses Flood, https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/great_molasses_flood . A large storage tank filled with 2.3 million US gallons, 8,700 cubic meters, 4, of molasses, weighing approximately, b. 13,000 short tons, 12,000 metric tons, burst, and the resultant wave of molasses rushed through the streets at an estimated 35 miles per hour, 56 kilometers per hour, killing 21 people and injuring 150. 5. The event entered local folklore and residents claimed for decades afterwards that the area still smelled of molasses on hot summer days. Someone booked a speaking event at the wrong Four Seasons and proceeded with a speaking engagement at a landscaping company next to a sex toy store. The stream of hair dye running down his cheek was the cherry on top. Ocean liner stewardess nurse Violet Jessop survived the sinkings of the Titanic in 1912 and the Britannic in 1916 and was on board the Olympic when it collided with another ship in 1911. Not really one event, but a very impressive scary track record. This by far is the best AskReddit I've ever read. Meteor striking the ground between two armies about to go to battle in 1974 BC. https://www.youtube.com/watch?vinrhjtfbf00 The PA police dropping a C4 bomb on a house that held the organizers of the movement, killing 11 including 5 children and destroying 61 homes in a 2-block area. The 13th of May 1985. I'm not an American and had never heard of this article. For those who want to learn more, https://us-news/2020/may/move-1985-bombing-reconciliation-philadelphia. Black Monday. A hailstorm killed around 1,000 English soldiers in 1360. More than had died in the entire war up to that point. 0%20 The %20 war. An earthquake in Middle USA 1811-12 was the strongest earthquake ever in the eastern US. It changed the course of the Mississippi River. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/1811% e2% 80% 931812_new_Madrid_earthquakes